Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we get into the book of Nehemiah. And Nehemiah was a man who was moved in his heart to go help the people who had returned back to Jerusalem, the exiles that were back in Jerusalem, to help them rebuild Jerusalem. He had heard that the walls had been torn down and were burned, and he wanted to come help them rebuild the wall. And the king allows him to do so, and after inspecting the wall, he basically tells the people what his intentions are. And he says in verse 17, "You see the bad situation we are in, that Jerusalem is desolate and its gates burned by fire. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem so that we will no longer be a reproach." In verse 18, I told them how the hand of my God had been favorable to me, and also about the king's words which he had spoken to me. Then they said, "Let us arise and build." So they put their hands to the good work. And that's a beautiful phrase. They said, "Let us arise and build." And then they put their hands to the good work. And this should be inspiration for us all, because if you think about it, us as Christians, we should all be with this heart. We should all have this heart of rebuilding, whether it's in relationships, in our own relationships, or in the relationships of others, whether it's with families, with churches, our nation, or our own personal spiritual life. Whenever we see that any of these things are in shambles and are made desolate, we should have the heart to say, let us arise and rebuild. Let's rebuild this relationship. Let's rebuild this family. Let's rebuild this church. Let's rebuild our nation. Let's rebuild our own spiritual walk with the Lord. We should all be builders in this sense. And it's done by basically three things. These are the three things that they had going for them, and we can have as well. First, they learned of the situation. Secondly, they were moved by the situation. And thirdly, they actively participated in helping in the situation. And so it takes all three of those things. First, we have to know that there's a problem. Secondly, we have to be moved by that problem. And then thirdly, we got to actually get busy about solving the problem and being involved in the rebuilding process. And this is something that we should all be involved in. One of the interesting things as you get into chapter 3 is that you see that there's people from all different walks of life participating in the rebuilding of the wall. You have priests in chapter 1, verse 1, verse 22, verse 28, goldsmiths in verse 8, 31, and 32. You have a perfumer in the latter part of verse 8. You have officials scattered all through the chapter, verse 9, 12, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. You have daughters involved in verse 12. You have Levites involved in verse 17. Temple servants in verses 2 and 6, and merchants in verse 32. And so you see all these different people from different walks of life involved in the rebuilding of the temple. And a lot of these people didn't have really, or at least based on what we know about them, they didn't have really a history or experience in construction, but they were busy about rebuilding. And that's true of us as well. We may not have, there might be other things that we are not gifted in and maybe don't participate in, like such as being a preacher or a worship leader or something like that. But one thing we all should be involved in is being people who rebuild. And when we do so, we are following God's own heart. In Revelation chapter 21 and verse 5, it says, "Behold, I am making all things new." We serve a God who is all about rebuilding and renewing things. He's going to renew all of creation. He's going to renew our own bodies and recreate them even better than they were before, making them indestructible, imperishable, and powerful bodies. And all of creation will share in the glory of the sons of God, Romans chapter 8 tells us. And so God has a heart to rebuild. He is a God of restoration, and we should be people of restoration and wanting to help rebuild relationships, families, churches, nations, our own spiritual walk, and many other things. So today, let's focus on that today. What are some things that we see around us that are left in disarray? And what can we do to have a heart to say, let us arise and rebuild? And then what can we do to practically put those things into place? That should be our heart's desire today. So with that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.